Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delay in starting our Ed Compact today. We were having some audio issues, and I thought it would be important for you to be able to hear our guests. So that is what caused our delay, and I am grateful that while we're late getting started, we are going to be able to continue with our session. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Farah Jimenez, and I'm the President CEO of the Philadelphia Education Fund, and I'm your host also for today's special session. As you well know, our session today is plainly and aptly titled, The Search for a New Superintendent, and we're going to delve into that topic in a moment. But first, I just wanted to thank all of our voluntary subscribers for Ed Compact. As you know, Ed Compact is a monthly speaker series that the Philadelphia Education Fund produces in order to have open and honest dialogue around some of the compelling issues that impact education in our region. And currently, we have several voluntary subscribers who contribute in order to make it possible for us to host this event, as well as session donors. So thank you. And for those of you who may be interested in subscribing or supporting the Ed Compact, you can just visit our website at www.philaedfund.org. As a reminder, there are a couple of features on our Crowdcast platform. One is our chat, which all of you have obviously been paying attention to, which is how you know that we are delayed. But the other is also, it's a great way for all of you to share reflections and resources along the way during the conversation that we're having today. The other feature is the Ask a Question feature, which is a great place to not just place a question that you may have for our panel, but also a way to upvote questions that have already been placed by other attendees there, so that we can make sure that they are posed. Now, for those of you familiar with Ed Compact, this Ed Compact is being recorded, in that we want to be able to record and capture reflections that are shared today so that we can share those with the search committee. Also, one of the features that is a part of the Crowdcast is the ability to invite any of you who pose a question up onto what they call the stage, in order that you may verbalize your question or elaborate on a question or comment that you've offered. We don't typically do that as part of an Ed Compact, but because we want this to be more interactive and allow for more elaboration on a comment and a question to inform the search, we may invite you to do that. You can accept or choose not to, but just look for a invite if we decide that we need you to expand upon your question. So let's set the stage for today's discussion. On September 27th, the Philadelphia Inquirer broke the news that after 10 years at the helm of the nation's top 10 largest school district, Dr. Hite had made the decision not to renew his contract. And while for some, this news came as a surprise, for those of us who know a little something about the tenure of an urban school district superintendent, the greater surprise was the fact that Dr. Hite would only end his tenure after what is considered a long tenure run. A surprise because, depending on the study one references, the average tenure of an urban school district superintendent is 3.2 to 5.5 years. And prior to Dr. Hite's tenure, as many of you Philadelphians may remember, we definitely were averaging within that range, with Dr. Hornbeck here with us for 6 years, and Paul Vallis for 5, and then Arlene Ackerman for 3 years. And in between there, a bunch of interim superintendents. So Dr. Hite's tenure has been a long one, and we thank him for that. And not only that, it's also been a challenging one and remains a challenging tenure. There have been school closures, budget challenges, staff reductions, governance changes, and not to mention a global pandemic. But there have also been some rewards to be celebrated for our school community. There have been improvements in our graduation rates and school climate, increased transparency and accountability through robust annual performance reporting, and also some major capital updates. To be sure, there's more that needs to be done, but there have definitely been some gains during these past 10 years. Now, the road for the next superintendent is not going to be easy, as we well know. There can be no doubt about that. But today we're going to hear from school board members with an update on the search that they're conducting and the role that we can all play in supporting it. And we're going to spend some time interacting with some questions towards the end of the presentation that are opportunities for you to reflect and offer your reflections back to the board members. As I mentioned, we'll be documenting our discussion and sharing it with the search committee. So if you have thoughts after today's presentation and when we conclude, please be sure to go ahead and email us at info@philaedfund.org, and we'll be sure to share those as well with the search committee. So let's introduce our panelists. Doing much of the presentation and hosting us today is Joyce Wilkerson, who's president of the Philadelphia Board of Education. She is, I think, the only board member currently there that both served under the School Reform Commission and under the new governance body, which is the Board of Education. And her current, she assumed office in 2018. She is joined by Julia Dancy, who is also a member of the Board of Education, and Lisa Sally, who is a newest member, one of the newer members of the Board of Education, appointed just this year in February. So with that, I'm going to bring Joyce onto the stage and also turn to a presentation that she would like to share with us. So Joyce.
Well, good morning, and thank you. Thank you, Farah, and thanks to the Education Fund for having us here today. One of the things that Farah brings is a deep steeping in school district business and history, so I can skip the first 5 pages of my presentation and try to jump right into the search. I'm proud to say that the new superintendent will be coming into a district that's substantially stronger than it was when Dr. Hite stepped into leadership. As Farah mentioned, we do have solid finances and have much stronger relationship with both the state delegation and city council and the administration. We have a number of challenges. Our number one challenge that the board is facing is its focus on student achievement. This will be the top challenge and the goal facing the new superintendent. We need to be focused on that fact that we're not there yet, and our students need this changed immediately. We also know that we're tackling challenges with our facilities. Those aren't going to go away. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Hopefully that will end before the new superintendent starts. As we talk about the search process, it's important to talk about this in the context of the politics of the city. This superintendent is not the board's superintendent, rather he or she will be Philadelphia's superintendent. And so we're trying to run a process where this is clear to everyone across Philadelphia. We need our superintendent to have buy-in from a diverse groups across the city in order to be able to lead the district successfully. Which leads me to the district itself, the process itself rather. As you can see, the first step of this search process is the one that we're involved with now, the public engagement phase. During the month of October, the board is hosting 17 listening sessions, both in person and virtually, in order to get feedback on the qualities and capabilities sought in the next superintendent. The board's going to review the feedback collected in these sessions and evaluate it alongside the objectives of goals and guardrails, which prioritizes students and their academic achievement, environment, and families in all decision making and resource allocation. The information that we gather will help us develop the superintendent job description and implement the search process in partnership with the headhunting firm that we're currently in the process of selecting. What's more, the feedback is going to be shared with the new superintendent in the form of a formal report. With public input in hand, the formal search process will begin in November, and our goal is to have final candidates identified by midwinter 2022, with the hope of announcing the final candidate who is going to be selected in the spring of 2022. During this time, Dr. Hite is going to remain in the role as superintendent and graciously plans to support the transition until the end of his contract in August of 2022. If you want any more information about the search process, I invite you to go to philasd.org/schoolboard/search to stay engaged throughout the process. And visit us in another listening session. We also have a survey online. We've had over 700 people take the survey already. You can also sign up for the email for updates. In addition to the listening session, the board has agreed to establish a search committee. We will be identifying 11 individuals who will be involved in interviewing the 5 finalists that the board identifies in order to make recommendations and provide the board with additional insights as we go, as we drive towards making a final decision. Once we have it narrowed down to 2 final candidates, we hope to have some kind of public exchange so that the city writ large will have an opportunity to engage with the finalists. The details of that aspect of the process have not been finalized. And while we appreciate the opportunity to share with you our process, we're most interested in hearing from you what it is that you think we need to be thinking about as we go about selecting our next superintendent. What are the qualities that we need in a superintendent? What are the issues that you think are most important that we need to be sure to put in front of candidates as we go through the evaluation process, trying to identify who will be the next superintendent for Philadelphia. And so if there are any questions about the process, the search process, I'd be delighted to answer them. But like I said, we're most interested in hearing from you and what it is that you'd like to see in a next superintendent.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
I think those are my puppies.
A slice of life day.
Exactly. All of a sudden I'm hearing a dog bark.
So,
I wonder if you could share a little bit of what you may have known about the process we used with Dr. Hite in the past. I remember there were a number of interviews that were done with elected officials, but also with the larger community, just to give us a sense of what that might look like.
The question is what the former process was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From what I understand, there was a committee that was established that was outside the SRC that had a much larger role in selecting the candidates to consider, and we have not taken that approach, although we recognize how important it is to have outside engagement. One of the things that has inured to the benefit of the entire school community is having really strong relationships outside of the district. Like I said, the delegation, the business community, the philanthropic community, and I think you get that by building that into the search process. And so, we, just like we're hosting, having this session, we've had sessions with the philanthropic community. We're talking with the business community so that they understand our process and can also provide input into the selection process. But we're going to have a committee that'll be interviewing the 5 candidates, but it's going to be something under the auspices of the Board of Education.
And if I understand,
there was a committee as well that's outside of the board.
No, we're
going to be involved.
We're networking with a lot of people. Like I said, we've had this kind of session with the business community, the philanthropic community. We're looking to have outside partners host these sessions in addition to the ones that we're going to be convening. We want to have outside partners actually hosting sessions. We're casting a broad net. One of the constraints you have is that, while you'd like to have everybody involved in every aspect, you don't get candidates applying. If, a lot of times we'll be going after candidates, and candidates may be interested and they don't know, their home district doesn't understand or know that they're involved in this process. And so there's a certain level of confidentiality you have to maintain with candidates. And so we're going to be striving to have that kind of confidentiality in order to increase the pool of potential candidates. So there's a trade-off there.
So I'm going to
turn the questions like you've directed to audience.
So one of the questions
that I thought could stimulate some
thinking is what are the areas of primary concerns that you as an education community would like the next superintendent to be capable of addressing?
Is that a question for me? Or
no, that's for
the audience.
Okay. Thank you.
So people can use
the chat function.
And I'm being told on my audio is coming through your mic, Joyce. So I'm going to mute you. Every time I speak.
Okay.
So Hillary, so the question here, Dr. Watts, is what are the areas of primary concern that you'd like the next superintendent to be capable of addressing? And it's a very broad question. Obviously, there's lots of us who have different thoughts on what that might be. But Hillary, I'm going to invite you up, if you don't mind, to join to see if you could elaborate on your comment here that the vast inequities in the district.
Is this where? Oh, there I am. Okay. I mean, I guess, I think one of the big struggles is the fact that we have, funding challenges, how resources are allocated across the district. I mean, there's formulas. I mean, I'm certainly not the expert on this, but, a lot of what's baked into the way we do things is based on equality, not equity, sort of formula, like every school gets this per pupil, or, these, like there's sort of these guidelines, that I think are sort of well-meaning and meant to sort of make sure that things don't, things aren't, that everybody gets like some of the basics, but then it somehow also masks the ability to respond to like particular areas of need and to put more resources in places where they're needed. I mean, I think, there's just a huge issue with inequity from school to school. I mean, whether it's, friends of groups who are able to raise money outside the district, not to mention just like, the input, the kids come like from very hugely divergent backgrounds, and family capacity is very different. I mean, there's just, like that to me is one of the biggest challenges that any superintendent has to address.
Thank you. I don't know if there's something you want to reflect on back on that, Joyce.
Yeah, I think the board shares a lot of that concern. It's something that we've seen surface in our goals and guardrails work. And so when we tackled the budget the last time around, we began to allocate resources. We began to allocate resources differently. And so understanding that not every school needs the same complement of school climate personnel, not every school needs the same complement of in almost any aspect. A lot of the commitments and the goals that we tried to achieve have been thwarted by COVID as as it's become so much more difficult to actually staff any of the schools appropriately. But like you point out, the inequity is a huge challenge. A new superintendent is going to have to understand and have strategies for tackling, because that also aligns with the board's commitment to goals and guardrails. The goals and guardrails aren't going away. That's going to be a through line. Exactly how the superintendent achieves the goals might vary, but we're going to remain focused on that. You're correct to identify that as a primary challenge for the district.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Hillary. Madeline, I'm going to invite you up because your question is not one I would have expected. It's an interesting one. Some of the other comments that are being shared are about facilities, making sure, so thank you, Dr. Watts, making sure that every student has a safe and inviting physical environment in which to live. So having some capacity around focus on facilities. And I'm going to turn it to you, Madeline, for your, can you expand upon your comment?
Sure. And apologies to folks. I have my 2-year-old running around in the background coloring, so she might make noise. Sure. So I worked for many years embedded in a public high school, and I've worked with colleagues who are also embedded in a variety of either neighborhood or citywide admit public high schools. And we, our focus was helping students develop post-secondary plans. And it seemed like baked into the very fabric of the school day was a policy that really undermined us being able to work with seniors in particular to create post-secondary plans, because in many cases, once a student had 2 classes for the day or 3 classes for the day, they were released from school. Maybe that could be as early as 10:30 in the morning. And so students were often not encouraged they weren't able to stay after school. They were prohibited from re-entering the building. And it's not the same probably in every school, but in the school I was working, it was framed as a way to reduce the population of the school. Our behavior specialist didn't want to, quote, deal with kids throughout the day. And so if you could reduce the number of seniors in the building, it was a climate control issue. And it wasn't in the best interest, in my opinion, for the students, because there was also a lot of, I think, window dressing around the purpose of it. Oh, students will get jobs. They'll take dual enrollment at Community College of Philadelphia. That wasn't happening. Kids were going home, or some were working part-time, but where do we as educators stand if we're saying that it's more important for you to be working part-time than it is for you to actually be preparing for your future and your long-term plans? Working at Rite Aid is great. Having a part-time job is great. But if you haven't taken an SAT, if you haven't applied to college, if you haven't really looked at different colleges, if you're not completing a FAFSA, that's what a school day is for. That's what the after hours of a school day are for. And so it just kind of struck me as insane that we have principals and teachers and counselors devoting all these resources to helping post-secondary completion when, right baked in the fabric of your school day, you're undermining that very policy or that very goal by telling seniors, get out of here by 11 a.m. or you're done, you've punched your ticket for the day. So I would like to see a full school day implemented for seniors unless they request a work roster and can prove that they actually are going to work, because we know that that is a financial reality for some of our students.
So if I were to frame your concern, thank you, Madeline. So if I were to frame your concern for the school board, would it be fair to say it's about thinking about structuring the academic day and academic calendar in a way that maximizes student long-term success? So thinking about that balance.
Yeah. And more schools have adopted a senior seminar, but it's still inconsistent, I think, across the district. So having a class that's devoted to thinking about what lies next for you after high school and having that be uniform, I think could be a good intermediary step, adding that extra class into kids' rosters, but certainly being thoughtful about that.
Thank you, Madeline. I don't know, Joyce. If you had anything you wanted to add. Okay, so it's interesting that a number of the comments so far that are in the chat are talking significantly, which is no surprise to anyone, about lack of resources, and then also within that, what those resources might very well be, whether they're about making sure students are supported in their social and emotional health needs, making sure that there are libraries, that there are programs around tech. I'm seeing some facilities questions, overall allocation of those resources. I wonder if we could I'd like us to move to the next question to stimulate your thinking is, what skills and capabilities are of the utmost importance for the next superintendent? As you guys are thinking about that question and offering some reflections in the chat, I just, based on the topic we just discussed, I was reminded how often when I was on the School Reform Commission, we would be talking about all of the resource allocation questions. And then there came a time where, for a variety of reasons, we were in a more stable place financially, and we started talking about education. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, we're talking about education on an education board, and how much of a luxury that felt like for all of us, that we could turn our attention to actual question of helping students with respect to learning. So, my own reflection on this question about skills and capabilities, obviously one of the things that I think is of utmost importance is to have an educator, somebody who has an education background. There's so many demands in the job, but someone who can at least reflect and have a theory around how we improve educational outcomes for students, I think is important. And I believe we have had that with Dr. Hite, which is why we've seen some of those gains. So any comments on skills and capabilities? And while we wait for those, I'm going to invite you, Joe Merlino, on to expand upon your question. Oh, Joe? I'm going to try that again. Oh, he's coming. Okay. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Before we turn to you, I just, I love Hillary Kane's response in terms of skills. I don't know if this is a skill or capability, or it might just be fortitude, nerves of steel, along with empathy and humility. Those are definitely important qualities, because it's not for the faint of heart to be a urban school district superintendent. So Joe, can you expand upon your question?
Yes. So I've been around long enough since the Connie Clayton days to know that every superintendent comes in with a plan or develops a plan, whether it's children achieving, one thing after the other that sort of gets layered on top of each other like an archaeological pile of stuff. So the issue for me comes into how do you implement whatever plan you come up with in a way that is thoughtful, coherent, logically sequenced, and has milestones, etc. So there's a sort of visionary aspect to a leader. There's also an implementer aspect in terms of being able to gather allies and delegate responsibility to capable people. So in your search for a superintendent, what is it that you're looking for? What do you prioritize? We had Dr. Hite's action plan 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Where do you see the next plan, or is it going to be a modification of plans that have already been implemented? And then will there be, so sort of the balance between those two? And if it's the visionary piece, how do you reconcile all of the other plans as well as cohere the visions of getting everybody on board? And if you're looking for an implementer, what is it that you're going to implement?
Thank you, Joe. Let's pose that question. And I wonder if I could add to it, Joyce, just by reflecting on the capabilities that might be best articulated in what Joe is laying out, which is that balance between leader, visionary, and implementer, manager.
Well, so the board's goals and guardrails aren't going away. That's going to, like I said, that's going to be a through line. So we're looking for somebody who is going to move the needle on reading in the early grades in particular, and math. And we want to see our graduates have the skills they need. We understand that buildings are important. We understand that, that our schools need to be welcoming. That's the context in which our children learn. But, we are not looking to make a U-turn away from goals and guardrails. I think how you move the needle will be something that a superintendent will be the responsibility of the new superintendent. But this is not, we're not looking for a U-turn. I think the whole, and I would categorize it or call it a search for leadership as opposed to visionary. That we really do need a leader, somebody that has some perspective on how it is that you organize this district to better mobilize the resources and coordinate the resources. There's a lot that's challenging about the district. We have 80 some odd charter schools. We have Innovation Network. We have contract schools. We'll be wanting to find somebody who has shown an ability to take as diverse a district as this and manage it, what kind of accountability they press, they push through the system. Those are the kinds of qualities or characteristics criteria that we're going to be looking for, as opposed to somebody that just comes in with a vision of education. But appreciate hearing your thoughts on this. One of the things that we've heard from some other parties is, we don't need an educator, we need a leader, somebody that has led successfully in the nonprofit sector or the business sector. That voice has not died out yet. Knowing the challenges that the district faces, I'd appreciate some feedback on the significance of having an educator. Farah, I appreciate your input on that, but I'd also like to hear from others on that.
Thank you, Joyce. And yeah, I see you responding, Joe, so I'm going to unmute you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, may I have just a follow-up question? As a former math teacher recovering, I would urge you to consider broadening the definition of what it means to be educated for a child beyond, certainly they need to read and they certainly need to do math, but we've focused so much on math and reading, or math and reading, that the whole child sort of gets left behind on the altar of these test scores. And human development, social emotional learning, being able to collaborate with other people, knowing yourself, these are hard to measure, but because they're hard to measure doesn't mean they're not valuable. So I would like to see the board consider broadening sort of the aims of education not to disregard math, but to de-emphasize it above all other aspects of human development that are important for children.
Okay, hold on. Yes, Joyce.
Yes, Joyce.
I think the board acknowledges that when you look at our guardrails, so one of the things that's important to the board is that children have exposure to other the other things that make education meaningful to children. And so we talk about co-curricular. We want to have the arts integrated into the curriculum, game playing integrated into the curriculum. So we don't want to see test scores soar, but we kill the child. That there's no spark there anymore. That, when the board was developing its goals and guardrails, that was a huge concern. And I'll point to somebody like Angela MacGyver, was fanatical about that. And so we're very mindful of that. And it's in part why the partnerships that the district forms are so important. We want a superintendent that's going to be able to cultivate those partnerships, because we have, we're a community with enormous cultural assets. We need to bring that into the, the schools, but the ability to manage partnerships is something that a new superintendent's going to have to be able to do, because we can't do it all, and those things are so important to children. to a child's education. So we're in complete agreement on that. We're looking for the new superintendent's going to have to, I'd like some, like I said, some feedback on this notion that it has to be an educator versus.
Yes, I'd love to pose that to our audience via the chat, but also directly to you, Joe. It sounds like you would be in favor of, or would like to see a superintendent, based on your questions, that also has a full education background, broadly defined as you've defined it. Would that be fair?
Yes, but I would be cautionary here. One needs to have a person with, yes, sort of the educational background, but also have their feet on the ground, and be and not have a theoretical background that is sort of applied to the situation, but instead understands the reality of the situation, can grasp and recognize the reality of the situation, and not let preconceived notions get in the way of what is real and what needs to be done. And also takes an organic view that they alone are not going to be able to do everything. That there are people out there working, and it's to mobilize the energy of people that are already wanting to do good things, rather than feeling that they alone have the vision, or they alone sort of can top down control it. So yes, an educator that's familiar with the idea of human development, but I could also see someone that's a sociologist, somebody that understands children, and the organizational systems that either squash them, like you say, kill that spark, or ways that the organization can be structured in an environment that provides oxygen to that spark. So that's a skill of balancing, but it's also recognizing what is real on the ground. So that is, and being empathetic, and allowing other people, say the best leader is not in front. I know you understand the idea of leading behind, but when you empower other people, you're more the orchestrator of it, and you don't need to take all the credit.
Thank you for that, Joe. Thank you for your comment and your question. And it seems like that is reflected in some of the comments that we're seeing as well here, in terms of qualities, the need for patience and calm and understanding, but also hear about skills and capabilities, just as Joe articulated, the ability to turn many differing stakeholder groups into a powerful coalition. And then, of course, the importance of communication, how important that is for a lot of the work, as we well know, and has been during the Superintendent Dr. Hite's tenure. I'm going to turn to our next question, which is, what professional experiences and expertise would you like to see in the background of the ideal candidate? So if you were to want to see, what would you like to see on the resume, basically, of the ideal candidate to step into the role next year? And as you are reflecting on that, I'm going to continue looking at the chat and just offering some of the reflections that were shared there. One from Matthew was having an educator in the superintendent role is less about expertise and more about empathy. It's an interesting comment, because no one can be an expert in everything. And that is true. There's a lot, as Joyce was saying, a lot of diversity in the of needs and skills that are needed in the next superintendent. But what's really important, Matthew continues, is to remember what it's actually like to be in the classroom. So being led by an educator is only as important as their ability to be empathic. Really important point. Another from Hillary was the ability to manage partnerships in a reciprocal way, so that partners are not just seen as those that are bringing resources, but that it's reciprocated, the supports that are brought by partners. And then the other is understand how policies actually get implemented or not, and how those decisions will affect those in the classroom. And thank you, Cecilia, for continuing to share the online survey. I would encourage all of you who are attending to make note of that and share that within your own respective networks. Another critical skill is being able to manage and recruit a strong C-suite team. And I know that that was really important for the district, particularly when we were experiencing all the financial upheaval, then had a period of calm, and now we're back to that as well. So having the right team there that can support the critical decisions that need to be made around finances is really important, as well as for academic supports. I know that the team is rounded out at the school district with a chief academic officer that helps support the aims of the board and the superintendent within the classroom. So one of the experiences that was shared by Anela, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is it's a track record of innovation. We need someone who is going to be imaginative around what is possible, and also to be able to think creatively around solutions. And now I'm gonna, if you're open to it, I'm gonna go ahead and invite you up to share a little bit more of that reflection, and I can continue to encourage our attendees to reflect on the question posed by Board President Wilkerson around the balance on the academic experience and the academic leadership experience of a potential superintendent, how important that factors against it being a broad leader. So let's say someone who may have been at the helm of a corporation and or a large nonprofit or foundation, but may not themselves have had an experience as an educator. So I'm not sure if I pronounced it right. Is it Anela?
Yes, that's
right. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Can you expand upon your comment?
Absolutely. Before I do, I just want to thank you for putting this together. I think it's really important to have space to, share our insights. I think I'm a Philadelphia native. I'm a proud product of the Philadelphia School District. But I think a lot of the issues that, I'm hearing about in terms of present day are a lot of the same issues that were true when I was a student in the Philadelphia School District as well. And I'm about 10 years removed. So I think it's especially with the pandemic, which has exacerbated a lot of the issues that were already prevalent in our city and, across the country. But I think we really have to start thinking differently about some of these solutions. And I think it's really important for the person coming into the seat to be open to new ways of thinking about things, right? Not trying to reinvent the same wheel that we've been doing, but trying to think more broadly around solutions. So I think it's really important to look at what is possible. I think from the perspective of what haven't we tried yet, I think is really important. And I think something that Jim noted in the chat was around leaning into the people in the city, I think is really important, from parents to that of students to that of just concerned citizens. And I think how we begin to think differently is inviting more voices at the table. And so I think the more that we do that, the more we can come up with innovative ways of doing things differently that benefit our kids.
Anela, that's a important point. I wonder if you have some thoughts on what that would look like on a resume. Like, what would be the things that you would be looking for? Because people can speak innovation, but how do you evidence that through an interview question or through a set of experiences or something on your resume?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I appreciate that push. I really think the person coming into this seat has had to work at length with the community and really being able to show that they are connected to the community in a meaningful way, just not, showing up to events here and there, but are really invested on the ground. Because I think that's where this stuff comes from. It's all about proximity to the issues. And I think the ways in which you get close to the problems is that you're there observing what is actually happening. So I think on the resume, it needs to provide some evidence that people are actually leading different organizations or communities, but doing it in a way that is also involving the public and being closely aligned with that of the community. So I think their resume has to show that they're somewhat in the work in a way that's translated into, more solutions that involve the people that are impacted by them, right? And not making decisions without them.
Terrific. And to pose the question asked earlier, what are your thoughts on the balance in terms of leadership? Is it important to have a school leader that has a background in education on the ground, or is it not as important as some other leadership qualities in terms of leading a large organization, impactful organization?
Yeah, I think I struggle with this. So I've been working in education, but I actually never like taught. So I've been working in like different support roles, and I struggle with whether or not like the superintendent should be, you know, someone who doesn't have that experience. I think that classroom experience is critical, and I think you do have to go through it. But I do think that, you know, for some of this innovation piece too, we do have to start thinking about people who have held other roles. I think a lot of what was lifted up in chat is important around having empathy, humility, and those things. But I do think that, like, in some ways, a track record has to be connected to education. I do think that you have to have some experience in that regard. Just not sure of like where the balance is, like after you had that classroom experience, what's like the minimum requirement? I'm not sure about that, but I do think that is exceptionally valuable. You had to like walk the shoes a bit, right, to be able to think more broadly about the work. But I do think that there's room for other people who've held like non-traditional educational roles, or not necessarily, or just in the community, that I think could also really bring a lot to this role too.
So a non-classroom experience in education would be valid.
I think
but
so.
No education, yeah. But no education experience would be.
Yeah, I'm trying to balance because I really feel strongly about having, you know, like people like who are leading this work need to have some classroom experience, but I'm just not sure how much of that, like where's like the cutoff for that? I'm not sure.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate your expanding upon your question. Joyce, I want to invite you if you had any reflections on that. No? Okay, terrific. And then Matthew, I'm going to invite you in, and then we'll be wrapping up with our last question after that, which is a question to everybody again. Really interested in your reflection here around that someone with experience in human-centered design. I'm not sure I know what that means, so it'd be great for you to expand upon that and what that would look like on a resume. Thank you, Matthew.
Sure. So yeah, I recognize that there are a lot of different labels for talking about that. I'm not interested in sort of saying someone has to have this specific background or skill set. But generally, it's the idea that when you face a problem or an opportunity, you begin with what the experience is of the people who are living that situation, whether that be students or teachers or principals. Begin by understanding it from their perspective, and then move into a process of sort of collaboratively designing solutions to that, with the idea that the first version is almost never the best version, and that the system's capacity to gather feedback and improve quickly is really important. So it's a way of thinking that started in a bunch of different disciplines kind of simultaneously, but is now underscoring everything from like thinking about how to make better computer keyboards to redesigning children's hospitals. But in general, it's the idea that we don't want expertise clustered in one small place and then deployed. We want to really understand the problems we're trying to solve from the perspective of the people who are most directly affected by those problems. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. And what are your thoughts also on the question posed by President Wilkerson around the balance in terms of leadership, school in classroom or classroom experience or education experience?
Yeah, you know, I think for me, when I watch closely what teachers are doing in classrooms, the breadth of expertise that is required to be a strong classroom teacher is pretty staggering. And then when you think about that across the different roles that people play in schools and school systems, that compounds even more. So I don't think it's about somebody having all of the know-how about how to tell everybody how to do their job. I do think it's really important to remember what it's like to have to roll out of bed at 5 a.m. and have a plan to work with a group of young people all day. And I think if we held those ideas in our heads a little bit more consistently, it's less likely that we would make so many decisions that sort of make presumptions about how much time teachers have available for the various things that we're asking them to do, and sort of begin with like, what is it you're facing right now? What is it you're working on right now? So again, I put this in the comment. I think it's really about empathy more than anything else.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. So our final question is one that's about what we can be doing here, and what are ways in which we as education stakeholders can support the new superintendent. I think that's just as important in terms of informing what we're able to give in terms of our own support. That could inform what it is that we need in terms of our next superintendent. So whether it's about signing on to be advocates to support with funding, or many of us provide resources to the school district through our own nonprofits and the work that our nonprofits are doing, or our research partners. What are the ways that we can be supportive to the next superintendent when he or she is installed, or even through the search process? As you're reflecting on that question, I'm going to invite Liza Herzog up to expand upon her social entrepreneurship comment. Liza, you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. And I think it was almost expanded on organically with that last comment on human-centered design, because most of what we consider kind of marrying the problem is extraordinarily human-centered. And as you kind of fast prototype solutions, it's the people, it's kind of defining the problem vis-a-vis the people involved most intimately with the issue, concern, or problem. So part of it, and to me, my mind goes to, why isn't a teacher in the C-suite, even as an advisor? You think very big, do we need some of the buildings anymore? I just kind of think like big entrenched problems over years and administrations, as Joe pointed out. Is it realistic to keep solving, sort of this turnstile of solving? And is there a cut point where you say, okay, this problem has been this messy, this complex, it has this many roots. If and when we can, is it then more efficient to turn our resources elsewhere? And I never know when, it would be very helpful if the next superintendent provides that transparency for that to happen. Even if it's just like to know when those thresholds and the realism, I guess. And I'm sorry, I am like in motion. So that's all.
I'm sorry, I just realized I'm muted. So Liza, just if you could elaborate also on the continuous feedback, how would you see that on a resume, or what would that be a question you'd be posing?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
So to me, it's that it feels like kind of this uninterrupted set of, and I wrote it in the chat, like opportunities for stakeholders to give feedback in various ways that are formative, just in time, kind of help and are integrated in decision making. I know there are many of survey. I actually participate in almost all. I'm a parent in the school district. I've been working in education for decades, so I understand. but some of them are either cumbersome, and the opportunity for someone to come in with a CV that kind of shows that openness, I guess, and it can give some prime examples of how that happens.
That's great. Thank you so much, Liza. Thank you for elaborating on your comment and offering that reflection. So I invited Julia on, and I've also extended an invitation to Lisa Sally, if there's any kind of culminating reflections or words you'd like to offer as we close up our session about what you've heard or next steps.
Well, first of all, again, as our president said, thank you for this opportunity. And while we have heard some different ideas, there are some common themes we're seeing, such as communication, such as empathy, such as being able to process things and be inclusive with your lower staff, such as selecting a team that is competent, that is good, and as knowing how to delegate when it's appropriate, so that, because no one expects everybody to know everything, and knowing how to delegate in those situations, and being, as we said, being transparent, being able to say when it's a problem and it's an error, and moving on from there. Those are some of the things. And so it's great. And we do still wrestle with this issue of, should it be a leader? Should it be a person who has come up all the way through the ranks, been a teacher, been a principal, and now you want to move on to being the superintendent, versus, yes, having some base of knowledge of that, but having been in other places where challenges that perhaps this new era we're in may very well be more the prevalent problems than what we've been dealing with before. So we do need all of the input, because without it, but as our president said, one thing that is the kind of flag post for us, that is, whoever comes in has to be able to accept and understand our goals and guardrails, and be able to position his system to be able to achieve those pieces.
Yeah. And thank you for that very much. And that, I guess, question remains an open one. And once you start to see the candidates, and I think it might be clearer, and as they make their way through the rounds of different interviews, it will become clearer. I do remember marveling at the diversity of challenges that are presented to a superintendent and a school board, and recognizing how important it is to have a team that reflects all those capabilities, with a leader that has generated the confidence from the team and from the board to be able to make decisions, even if it's not their core competency that they have to make those decisions in. It is a challenge. I'll let you close this out, Joyce, with any comments you may have, and then I'll just thank everybody.
Joyce, ask one question, one that's been plaguing us, about from where should that superintendent come?
Like Julia said, one of the comments that we've received recently is it's got to be a Philadelphian. You can't have somebody who is not from here understanding Philadelphia. And so if people would, even if it's in the chat, just weigh in on that. As my concluding remarks, please, if you have other insights to share, go to the board's website. This exchange has been so valuable for the board, trying to figure out what it is that we want, how it's evidenced. These are huge questions, and there's probably no more important a challenge that this city faces than making progress for our children. And so no matter how off the wall your thought might be, we're soliciting all the input. It's extraordinarily helpful, and appreciate that you've taken time to be here today, shared your insights, and look forward to having you engaged. Like I said, we're going to have more listening sessions. If you want to host a listening session, let us know. We will support your interest in hosting a listening session. come to our board meetings if you have thoughts you want to share. We care about more than just our action items. So you're challenging us to think differently about the capital infrastructure. We'd appreciate your sharing those ideas. Don't just, don't wait. These are questions we're grappling with all the time, and there. Thank you so much, and we look forward to this input.
I am muted. Oh gosh. Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I really appreciated that closing remark about the importance, how many people think it needs to be a Philadelphian. And I know we often think of our problems as being immensely unique, that only someone from here can understand us. But there is one thing I think that makes this particular charge a unique one, in that we have a school board that in a school district that doesn't have a school board that gets to tax. And so all of our decisions, all of our resources have to come through pure influence and the ability to generate support. So there is a big challenge for anybody who's in that role, whether they be from Philadelphia or elsewhere. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And really a big thank you to all of you on the board for engaging the community in this process at this early stage before you've even figured out who the search firm is going to be. And as we know, given what we've seen over the last years in terms of your commitment to community engagement, what we know will be part of the entire process. And we'll be sharing these comments with our school board so that they can use it to inform their search further. And thank you so much, everyone. And I appreciate your hanging in when we had our audio difficulties earlier.
Thank you.
Have a great Thursday.
Yes.